Talk about the role of mobile and industrial IoT. So it's probably about I would say 15 to 20-minute presentations, and I can probably take questions after that. Just to sort of introduce myself, my name is Sundar, and I'm the founder and CEO of a venture-backed startup called Vegam, and we are in the Bay Area, actually the East Bay. And obviously, this is not a pitch for my startup, so I'm going to make the presentation as generic as possible. But I'll sort of give you just a little bit context about my startup, so you can sort of understand where I'm coming from, right? So what we do is we maximize manufacturing uptime by using a couple of different mobile use cases. What we call mobile intelligent mobile workflows and mobile remote monitoring. And we go specifically after manufacturing customers, and in particular what we call process manufacturing, like iron and steel, oil and gas, mining, and so on, right? And obviously this is a Predix meetup, so our interaction with Predix is the way we sell our product is we have a mobile app on the App Store. It's a ready-made mobile app called Vegam Universal Remote Control, which anybody can download. But there's also kind of like a cloud-based backend platform that sort of goes along with the app. So for a lot of customers who don't have their own industrial IoT platform, they end up using our platform, backend platform. But for customers with existing industrial IoT platforms like Predix, for example, right, they can actually use our app on top of their existing platform. So our sort of touch point with Predix is where we are trying to integrate our application on top of Predix and sort of offer it to the Predix customer base, right? So that's kind of where my, as I said, interaction with Predix comes from, right? So let me just sort of go directly into the presentation, right? So obviously you must have heard about, I'm assuming that a lot of you guys have been into a lot of industrial IoT events and whatever conferences, probably read a lot of articles on industrial IoT, right? And this is kind of what you would see if you ask somebody what's the trend, that's technology trend that's sort of driving this industrial IoT, and people usually come up with all these things, right? So obviously you have sensors. Sensors are getting better, cheaper, faster. There are all kinds of sensors available right now, ranging from sensing small chemicals to whatever it is, right? So obviously that's driving a lot of this, right? And network connectivity, right? Connecting to the network, from the sensors or from some of the edge devices, again, it's getting cheaper, better, faster. Companies like Cisco, Qualcomm, are kind of like hugely invested in this space and sort of driving the market around this. Obviously, edge computing, right? I mean, again, because of the compute getting cheaper and smaller and faster, a lot of different edge computing devices have sort of come up in the recent few years. And again, you can put in a lot of algorithm and computing, security and big data all in the edge right now. Again, companies like Intel, for example, they're driving this a lot, right? And obviously, cloud. There's an explosion of cloud, right? Even in manufacturing, I would say, maybe there are 20% of manufacturing customers who have never used cloud and sort of very apprehensive using cloud. So probably about 20% on the other side, started using cloud, left and right everywhere, right? But there's sort of like a middle block, about I would say 60%, which they have sort of used cloud here and there, right? And everything that they want to use going on for now, they've sort of said that cloud is the way to go, right? So the market is sort of there. It's kind of ripe for maturity, right? And obviously the big data, right? I mean, so there's so many technology enhancements in terms of big data and so on, right? So again, all of these things, ultimately, I think what it contributes to is, ultimately sort of more connected devices, right? More connected devices, any sort of device in the manufacturing factory space or field service or whatever it is, right? And this is sort of the metric, that you would see that's usually getting used by, if you see a report from Cisco or, or Accenture, right? I mean, this is sort of the main metric that they use to sort of tell that, hey, the industrial IoT market is, proceeding really and rapidly fast, right? But one thing in my mind, and I think one of the trends that sort of gets overlooked a lot, right, and sort of ignored a lot, is mobile, right? And because the reason is that mobile is probably the only driver, that actually adds more people into the mix, right? The rest of all the drivers, in my mind, so that's sort of adding more connected devices into the mix. But if you take mobile, right, that sort of adds more people into the mix, right? More users into the mix. And what that more users means is, more number of use cases, right? So let me sort of give you sort of paint a picture so you can sort of contrast, what happens before and after mobile, right? And I'll sort of use manufacturing, as a context, right? So as I said, a lot of our customers happen to be in manufacturing, and so for example, one of our iron and steel customer, and again, this is pretty common in iron and steel and any process-oriented customers, and usually they have like a huge factory, and they do have a very good level of industrial automation already. So all the sensors and everything is already there. They've been doing it for the past 10, 20 years. So that way the industrial IoT is not really that new for them. But the problem there is that everything is sort of limited to what they call a control room experience. So basically, there's like a couple of people sitting in the control room or office room, right? And they're looking at this software. They're looking at this desktop, and they might be running like software like SCADA software from Siemens or Schneider or Fujitsu or whatever, right? So they're kind of looking at all this machine data and alerts and all that, right? But again, at the end of the day, this entire software stack, it's been built, keeping these pretty much these two people in the control room in mind, right? So what happens right now is if they see an alert, if there's a problem, right? What they do is they just take the phone, and they call like the plant managers, they call the engineers, right? So typically in a factory of this size, there'll be upwards of like 200 engineers, right, in that manufacturing setting. So basically, it's just the two people who have been sort of exposed to this whole entire industrial automation so far. The rest, 200 or so people, right? I mean, they don't even go near the system, per se, right? I mean, all the interactions with this software system that they have is, basically what the control room guys calls and tells them, right? So again, think of a situation where all of these users have a mobile app, right, and in their hands, and they are able to get the alerts directly, and they're able to get the machine readings directly. They're able to interact with the machines and directly, do all sorts of things, right? So that in itself, suddenly takes your number of users from like 2 to like 200, and just by the nature of doing that, right, it sort of increases a whole lot of innovative use cases, right? I mean, obviously, as a company and as our product, we have come up with some use cases, but more and more, we work with customers. We're just discovering more and more use cases, right? I mean, most of the use cases actually come from them, right? So, I mean, it gets really, really innovative, right? So I think that's where mobile sort of makes a very real difference, right? A little bit sort of drill down into it, right? I mean, obviously, a lot of these points are very obvious to most of you guys. But I'm just sort of saying this for the sake of completeness, right? So again, one thing is that everybody has a mobile phone, right? I mean, it's pretty ubiquitous. Everybody has a smartphone. I mean, one question that I get asked a lot is hey, do people in manufacturing setting or field service setting, and do they have mobile phones, right? So yes, everybody in the world has smartphones right now, and everybody knows how to use smartphones, right? I mean, people have been using smartphone apps, for their personal use or whatever. So everybody sort of intuitively knows, how to use smartphone apps, right? So that's something that's sort of already available, and it's sort of time to take advantage of that, right? And the second thing I think the mobile technology offers is obviously location, context, and camera, right? So basically, again, take a manufacturing setting, right? You can know where that person is, which factory location he is, which machine location he's near to, right? What that person's role is, whether it's an engineer, electrical engineer, or mechanical engineer, or plant manager, right? And he'll be able to, take photos, take videos. So it sort of gives a whole lot of, context and collaborative capabilities as well, right? Again, in contrast with whatever industrial automation that we had in the past couple of decades, right? All that was, pretty much the same, who was doing it. Again, as I said, it is just intended for the couple of people in the control room, right? For them to use, right? And I think the third factor is that manufacturing plants are very physically large, right? Just to give you an idea, right? Some of the iron and steel customers that we're working with, their campus is about 5,000 acres. They have their own airstrip in the campus. They have their own Hyatt hotel in the campus. They have their own cell tower infrastructure. So it's pretty large and humongous. And people are not exactly sitting right next to each other, right? So people are out and about. And mobile is sort of the only way to even communicate with people. I mean, earlier 10 years before it used to be walkie-talkie from Motorola and so on. But right now everybody is already sort of using smartphones. But as I said, it's not being used that much, right? Beyond sort of the calling facility, right? In factories, and that sort of presents a lot of opportunity. And of course, in terms of cost as well, right? I mean, traditionally, even before mobile, manufacturing plants have tried to solve this in many different ways. They put these costly, what they call HMI systems, which are basically screens, everywhere along the factory, but they are pretty expensive, right? I mean, if you think from a cost point of view, mobile is sort of like the cheapest option available right now. And as I said, you can deliver a very personalized experience, depending on the user, depending on the situation, the context, and you can sort of take all this into consideration, right? And just to sort of wrap it up, right? I mean, so obviously people hear about all this, and it all looks very obvious, because everybody has been using mobile apps, for their personal lives. But they'll say, okay, what does it mean, for manufacturing or industrial IoT? Right? What's the ROI, right? So some of the metrics, that we've got some of the customers, they sort of indicate something around 30% reduction in downtime. I mean, this sort of basically comes from more efficient communication, more efficient collaboration, information at the right time to the right people, and so on. But at the end of the day, it does save a whole lot of downtime, and by that effect, a whole lot of money to those manufacturing customers, right? So I'm just going to go into some of the use cases. So I'll sort of brief touch base at a very high level, right? I'll sort of leave your imagination to what all can be done. But of course, the best use case or the de facto use case for any industrial automation or industrial IoT system like Predix, for example, right, is monitoring. I think what remote mobile adds is the remote monitoring aspect to it. So obviously, you can monitor everything remotely. I mean, as I said, it takes into context the user, the location, everything. So at the end of the day, it just adds a very rich user experience, very rich contextual and a personalized user experience, right? And the other use case, which is obviously getting a lot of traction, is what I call mobile workflows. So again, in a typical industrial or a manufacturing setting, right? So understanding the information is one thing, but what you do with that information, usually people sort of work collaboratively, and it's usually kind of like a set of steps. Basically the plant manager will say, hey, what, electrical engineer, you go take this inspection report, and mechanical engineer, you go order these materials. So again, it's a list of steps or workflows, that sort of get orchestrated, and usually, pre-mobile, right? I mean, they all get orchestrated in a very, manual project management kind of manner. So mobile sort of, brings in a lot of opportunity to sort of, orchestrate the whole thing sort of in a digital fashion, right? So that's again, you can have all kinds of workflows. You can have installation workflows, you can survey workflows, schedule maintenance, unscheduled maintenance, all that stuff, right? And again, each of these specific workflows, if you target very specific industries, manufacturing, construction, or whatever, there's so many details and so many variations to it, that you can actually create a startup just concentrating on just one of these workflows, and you can get really big, right? So that's how big the market is, right? And just sort of, moving sort of in the course of workflows, right? So one of the things, that gets, again, people, it looks very obvious, but there's a huge impact, right? It's what I call the digitization use case, right? Even right now, if you go to industrial settings, there's a lot of pen and paper, that gets involved. People just go around just, working, on pen and paper, right, all the time. So nothing is sort of, digitized, right? I mean, they do have all those, SAP systems and ERP systems on the back end, but most of the time, it's done in a very offline manner, probably at the end of the shift, to go back and, they sort of record all those things, right? But until then, everything is done sort of in a very manual sort of pen and paper sort of fashion, right? So just the aspect of, digitization, sort of moving all of that onto a sort of like a mobile app sort of experience, it just brings in a lot of value, right? And cuts a lot of downtime, or, cuts a lot of lack of efficiency, right? And something obviously that's similar is, as I said, collaboration, right? I mean, if you take I would say, in the personal space, collaboration is probably the killer use case for mobile. If not for, I mean, I would even put social media sort of under collaboration, right? If not for the collaboration use case for mobile, we wouldn't have had like so many different social media companies or, chat-based companies. So it's a killer use case, in obviously on the personal consumer side. But on the manufacturing side, it's or the industrial side, right? It's not being used that much. I mean, there are obviously several startups, which are trying collaboration in very specific context, right, or specific verticals. But again, there's a lot of impact and a lot of advantage you can sort of bring in by sort of having collaborative tools, right? Taking pictures, sending videos, and whatnot, right? Again, this is sort of leads the segue from collaboration, right? So I think at the end of the day, what also a mobile app also enables is to sort of like build sort of like a knowledge base, capture every knowledge and sort of build a knowledge base. I mean, this could come in from various, it captures the machine data on one side, it captures the workflow on the other side, it captures, all the collaboration and everything. So everything is pretty much captured, including, where the user's location, everything like that, right? And it can obviously use this knowledge base, right, to do all sorts of analysis, all sorts of big data, machine learning analysis to come up with, all different outcomes, right? So we do have a lot of different, things that we do in our product, right? Ranging from what we call suggested maintenance and so on. We can even suggest, what maintenance a particular person has to do, based on what has happened in the past. But that's just one example, right? As I said, there are a lot of use cases, a lot of different verticals that can get very interesting. The last but not the least, so mobile as an edge device. This is something that again gets overlooked a lot. Again, as I said, edge computing. It's there's fog computing, edge computing. That there's a huge trend there. And as I said, a lot of companies like Intel, everybody wants to sort of create their own edge device and put it out on the market. But one thing that people sort of ignore is that mobile smartphones are probably the most important and the most common and the most cheapest of edge devices, right? So again, there is a lot of innovative use cases where the smartphone itself can be used as somewhat of an edge device. Right? I'll give you an example. Consider all these huge oil pipelines or water pipelines, right? Where you might have there might be hundreds of miles and you might have sensors every mile or so, right? So one thing, you can have a project where you can say, I'm going to industrial IoTize everything, connect all the sensors to internet, right? And then do everything based on that. But usually, that ends up being a multi-million, multi-year project, right? So what a lot of companies do is, somewhat of a, intermediate approach, right? Where, if there is a field service guy, if he sort of walks around to a particular sensor, he sort of, sensor, sort of the mobile phone connects to the sensor, over Bluetooth, and then the data is uploaded through the mobile phone to the internet, right? So in some ways, it sort of acts as a modem and also some sort of an edge device as well. You can run some analytics there. Again, this is just one simple example, right? But there are a lot of other use cases, where a mobile device, right, can be used as an edge device. And as I said, probably it's one of the most important, most common, and most powerful and most cheapest, edge device out there. And this is not something that many people are thinking through very much right now, but there's a lot of opportunity there, right? So I'll sort of end my discussion here, right? As I said, my name is Sundar, and you can contact me. My email address sundar@vegam.io. If you have any questions, I'm glad to take it right now. Yeah.
Are you seeing other platforms besides GE Predix that has a problem with native mobile versus web mobile and the whole security that's around that and running a web-enabled app versus an actual native app?
Yeah.
Are you finding that other companies that are competition with GE Predix are also doing the same thing, or what are you finding?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So let me sort of put them into two camps, right? So there are some platforms which come from the old world, legacy platforms like SCADA and so on, right? Siemens SCADA, Schneider SCADA, and all that, right? On the other side, you have sort of like the new world platforms like Predix, ThingWorx, and those like, right? What the old world platforms are mostly doing is that to them, mobile, they're just taking their browser, whatever they have on the browser, they're just sort of shrinking it in size, and they're sort of putting it in a mobile form factor. That's kind of the level of mobilization they have done, right? And obviously that doesn't take care of whatever different use case that I sort of mentioned, right? Some of the newer platforms, they are sort of trying to build something native around it. But again, in my mind, most of the platforms like Predix are more like sort of like a broad, developer-oriented platform, right? So Predix sort of gives you the tools to build a native mobile app, if you will, right? And then so does other platforms which are
Actually, does.
To some level. Yeah, so I mean, our value proposition to our customers is, hey, yeah, you can use these platforms and build your own mobile app, right? It'll take like 6 months to a year, and you'll have to put a lot of resources. Or you can start using our ready-made app, and sort of you can configure it to our use. So that's kind of our value proposition, right? But yeah, I mean, I would say the platforms which are looking at it very broadly, right? They're still not, focusing on mobile to some extent, right? So because of that, because of the lack of focus there, right? I mean, they're still sort of somewhat sticking to this, web browser enabled, mobile experience versus, building a very native experience, right? Now on the other side, you also have these, this is not like Predix, right? So you have these very vertically oriented, platforms, right? That could be a platform, just for lighting or something like that, right? Some of those platforms, they do provide a very good, native mobile experience, right, which is very well suited for that particular end user, right? The problem in generic platforms is that they don't really know what to build. I mean, there's like too many use cases out there, and it's very generic, so it's kind of hard for them to build, one particular application or so on, right? And a lot of times, either they just sort of ignore it, that's kind of the last thing that comes to their mind, or they give some sort of tools, right, to sort of build it out yourself. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the usage of drones, especially in industrial and open mines, surface mines. There's a lot of drones which go around, take pictures, and then there's information which is sent back. So they kind of build their own custom solution because, especially in the mining industry and all, they have these, the surface mines and the blasting and all that which goes in there.
Yes.
So do you integrate with any specific drone related surveillance videos or to capture that information as well? And
yeah, not at the moment, but I would say this, right? Just like so I sort of answered, right? If a startup or a company is is already working in a very specialized vertical, right? Let's say using drones for mining, for solving some particular use case. Usually, I think they usually come up with all software stacks, right? Ranging from backend to the mobile app, which is very well suited for that, right? So, I mean, that's a very niche area for each one of these companies, right? I mean, we are a little bit different. As I said, we are focusing on manufacturing and specific use cases there. So maybe the use cases may not match, right? But our integration point is more in terms of these other platforms, who lack mobile capabilities, and we sort of become their mobile layer, or if some customer has this Predix platform, they can sort of use our app to go.
A software platform called Droneware is pretty much the leader right now, in my opinion, in the industrial drone software space.
Yeah.
So, do you have any direct machine to mobile integrations as a part of your offering, or is it always with a platform like Predix?
Yeah, so I talked about the mobile edge use cases, right? So that's basically some sort of like a direct machine to mobile, right? I mean, we have sort of built, we actually call it machine to mobile layer, MobMac, we sort of trademarked that part, right? Where, the mobile phone can directly talk to, they talk to boilers, or, they talk to some industrial motors in our cases, right? And sort of, they get all the information from there, then they post it back to the cloud. I mean, this is sort of used in those cases, either where these machines are not connected all the time to the internet, so there's no reliability.
Over a native protocol that probably that machine talks.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously there are lots of, I mean, as much as possible, we try to make it native, right? But again, there's, the industrial automation industry has been there for a long time, so there's like too many variations, too many protocols, and so on, right? But yeah, that's one of the use cases. But I would say most of our use cases, where we take the data from a centralized aggregated point, right? Whether it's a SCADA or OSI or any kind of software, put it to our cloud, and then it goes to mobile. That's the normal use case, but there are also a lot of use cases where, it sort of interacts with some of the machine nearby, right? And again, it also produces a lot of opportunity. You can use NFC, for example, to even actuate things. You can start machines, right? Which can, start machines much more securely. I mean, earlier you just have an on-off switch, and anybody can, switch the on-off button. Now, you can have like a NFC-based, secure, using a mobile phone sort of thing to start it. So there are a lot of other opportunities in that space. I mean, we're not too much into that space, but I'm pretty sure, a lot of companies, will get into that space as well. Yes.
It's a big picture question, but there's a parallel trend going wherein the number of people, because of IoT and the computing power we have now, the remote monitoring is turning to not people but machines. So 10 years down the line, lesser number of users, meaning lesser number of mobile for industry. do you think that this would be an orthogonal trend to that?
So are you saying like, are you talking about automation where essentially
Right.
computers are monitoring machine and sort of taking self-corrective actions? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So I would probably answer this way, right? I mean, the sort of like the reduction in manufacturing workforce, it's already sort of happened, in the last few waves, right? I mean, even if you go to a manufacturing plant right now, it's pretty lean, considering the size of that plant, right? You have very few people, for such a big manufacturing plant, even this stage, right? So I don't know, how much. I guess what you're asking is, will there be automation that will sort of reduce the number of total users itself? I mean, that's a little bit more, I would say, philosophical question there. But I don't see that trend happening, anytime very soon, right? It might happen in 20, 30 years, I don't know, right? But I mean, even then, there are a lot of, I mean, even now, if you take plants in US and Europe, which are extremely automated, the workforce that they have, it's anything that can be automated is already automated, right? It's the engineers, mostly around fixing things and all that. These are things which can't be done by computers, right? Somebody has to physically go and do something, right? So I mean, I would still think we would have that thin layer of users still going around in manufacturing. I mean, of course, in other countries, for example, we sell in India and other countries as well. There, so 1:10 ratio, right? I mean, for same size of manufacturing plant, you have 10 times more users. Maybe some of it will pare down, but yeah, I mean there are some things to do manually. So that, yeah. Yeah, I think, sorry, you had a question.
Well, I think you sort of elaborated on it. It was more like going for the retail use case of collaboration and the edge device and mobile device, but I think you covered it.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question. So other than SCADA, what are the other data points to collect your data from?
So, I mean, it's a lot of what we indicate is SCADA, but again, sometimes it's OSI, PI, or other historians, right? Sometimes we go directly into the database. And sometimes, they also have some sort of, PLC systems, right? Again, there's a whole lot of different varieties of, Yeah, so we've built a lot of connectors, that can talk to a lot of, I would say, popular industrial automation software. But if somebody has a very custom system, right? I mean, obviously, it would involve building some level of, custom integrator. But again, it's not. Again, most of these software has been built in the past, couple of decades. So, they're not as complicated, as you might think, right? I mean, so the one problem that they have is, they may not be exposing everything in a sort of like very well defined, REST API sort of fashion. But there are sort of other ways to, a lot of time, just store file locally on XML file or, sometimes. And there are other easier ways to, get the data out of them, right?
So it's not from the format, actually, but kind of putting in whatever you have to do to integrate, like what you have to put into the device to improve software. It's kind of the integration point to set out the data and system. So
Yeah.
what's your experience about that?
So as I said, what happens is that, since we are focusing on a particular set of, verticals, right, like I said, iron, steel and mining and all that, typically, if you go across, all the iron steel customers, right, they tend to use very similar, software and equipment, right, mostly because, when, let's say if I'm an iron steel factory, right, and I want to create like a new, whatever, steel melting shop plant, there are other companies, there's an Australian company which basically, I can outsource the whole work, they basically build the whole plant from scratch, including the hardware, software, everything. So because of that nature, right, there's a lot of, reusability, specifically in process industries. So the kind of, software that I see is also pretty much very similar. So most of the cases, for us, once we have sort of integrated with some of the commonly used software in a certain vertical, most of the other customers seem to sort of use almost the same kind of software. So we haven't seen a lot of situations, where we have to integrate with something totally new, right? And of course, we'll probably, if we go totally different vertical, we might face something like that. But I think, obviously, we've sort of gone over that hump and we're sort of in a situation where that integration is not so much of an issue right now. And of course, if somebody is, that's where I think Predix, somebody's already using Predix, right? That integration is sort of already taken care of. Predix sort of becomes the, the aggregated data source for us at that point.
follow-up actually, so once you get this data and start, well, again, there are access issues, access control, and security issues. So how do customers feel about that?
So you're asking generally about security or more about identity protection?
From your application perspective, right? Because you have the ability to not just rely, but even potentially control.
Yeah. So I mean, so one of obviously all the security in terms of aspects are controlled to our backend. So administrator can log into our backend, sort of write security policies, create users, user groups, permissions. They can even put location-based security, basically saying only if the user is within the factory zone, they can access it, right? Sometimes they also have like multiple levels of security. It's sort of like to mimic what happens in the manufacturing. Some tasks need some permissions from the supervisor, so you sort of can send a request back to the supervisor, he approves it. There's sort of like a approval workflow as well, right? And obviously on top of that, we use encryption, at rest and at flow and all that, right? So that's again, there are customers who might be using their own security solutions, right? I mean more from the identity provider side, right? I mean, they might be using Active Directory or something else, to sort of store their identity, or in which case, we have out-of-the-box integrations with some of those identity providers as well.
So if the manufacturing enterprise is already using some kind of an MBAS, do you integrate it with that, or do you have your own MBAS kind of?
So when you say MBAS, are you talking about the? Yeah, so I mean, our backend is essentially an MBAS, right? If I haven't seen any lot of customers who have sort of have their own MBAS, right? I mean, that's not a situation that I've seen so far. I mean, all that they have is obviously they have existing SCADA systems or OSIPS systems, industrial automation systems. They have existing ERP systems, right, from SAP and so on, right? MES systems, workflow systems, all that. So these are the systems that we typically integrate with, and obviously the LDAP and Active Directory and all those systems, right? I haven't sort of come across, maybe if they have it, they already have mobile apps, so probably not a good customer for us. And thanks for your time and thanks for all the questions.
Thank you, Sundar, for the talk. I want to thank our sponsors again for helping us put this together. The Action Spot for Andy, basically gratefully giving us this venue. So hope to see you all very soon for another meetup and your follow-ups. Thank you.